record. Go to share screen. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're well. Thank you for tuning in. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It is November 11th. Getting ready for Parshas Chayei. So I wanted to share some Divrei Torah with you today, dealing with Chayei. Look at some sources. Perhaps some of them we've seen, some of them we may not have seen before. So I wanted to share this with you. Let's start with just commenting something that's going to be very different this year, Parshas Chayei, than all years in recent history. And that is what's going to be, or I should say what's not going to be happening in Hebron this year. Every year in Parshas Chayei, in Israel, they call that Shabbat Hebron. That's the big day, the big Shabbos, that Jews from all over Israel come to show their solidarity with the Jewish community in Hebron. And Kiryat Arba is, since 1967, there's been numbers of very brave Jews who have gone back to Hebron. Hebron is a place that, in this week's Parsha, Avraham Avinu, that's his first acquisition of land in Eretz Yisrael that is purchased, and we have an ancient foothold in Hebron as a way of showing that and solidifying the relationship between Hebron and the Jewish people. This week is called Shabbat Hebron. There's usually thousands and thousands of Jews who come from all over the country to spend this Shabbos in Hebron. They tent out, they set up tents everywhere, and the Jewish community in Hebron hosts everyone. Huge meals. It's a wild event. I was never there, but I've got friends and relatives who were there, and they would tell me about this. It was a big deal. I imagine this year with COVID and coronavirus, I imagine that that's not going on. But that has to be a real shock, I would say, for all of the Jewish community in Hebron that was so used to every year on Shabbos Parshas Chayei welcoming Jews from all over the country and around the world, I should say. And it was it's something that's going to be very different this year. But be that as it may, there's a bond between the Jewish people in Hebron that goes back millennia, and it's really based in this week's Parsha, and Parshas Chayei. So let's see. The Parsha begins, and it really raises a fascinating question. And it's something that I don't think I ever really stopped to analyze. Prior to this year, I want to share it with you. Well, let's see, the Parsha begins, Vayu Chayei Sarah, and the Parsha begins telling us this is what the life of Sarah, what did it consist of? How old was she? How long did she live? Mayashana, 100 years, 20 years, Sheva Shanim, in 7 years. So for a grand total of 127. Shnei Chayei Sarah, those were the years of the life of Sarah. And there's many commentaries that explain why it's broken up this way. Just tell me that she lived for 127 years. Why does it say Shana in between every numerical value? Right? It should have just said Meya ve'esrim ve'sheva shanim. But instead it says Meya Shana, Esrim Shana, and then Sheva Shanim. So there's a lot of commentaries on that. Let's see the next pasuk. And they're important commentaries. It's just not what we're going to focus on this morning. Next pasuk, Vatama Sarah. Where did Sarah die? The Kiryat Arba, in the region, in the locale that was known as Kiryat Arba. He Hebron, which is another name for Hebron. The Eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. Vayavo Abraham, and Abraham comes back to Hebron, Lispod l'Sarah v'libkosa, to eulogize her and to cry for her. So the question is, where was Avram coming back from? It says Avram came back from somewhere. Why wasn't he with Sarah? Why wasn't he with Sarah? They were living in Hebron at the time. Where was Avram? Was he out on a business trip? Where was he? So let's see Rashi. Rashi quotes the Gemara. It says Rashi, it says, and you'll actually see this, there's the psukim back this up. Vayavo Avraham, Avram came back to Hebron to mourn her. Well, where was he? Mi Be'er Shava. Avram happened to have been in Be'er Shava, south. He was in Be'er Sheva when she passed away. So now he returns. I guess word reaches him, or whatever reason he was in Be'er Sheva. Now that is past. So now he returns to Hebron to eulogize her, cry for her, and to purchase a piece of land where she can be buried. Okay. Now, where do we see? Is there any scriptural reference to this? Does the pasuk mention this concept that Avraham was in Be'er Sheva? So let's back up a parak. So Chayei begins with chapter 23, Chav Gimel. So let's go back to Chav Beis. At the end of Vayera, after the incident of Akedas Yitzchak, that's how Parshas Vayera concludes the story of Akedas Yitzchak, the binding of Isaac. So after all that, after the Akedah is finished, the pasuk tells us, I've got it there, it's chapter 22, that's Chav Beis, pasuk Yud Tes, verse 19. Vayoshav Avram el Na'arav. So after this incident, that Yitzchak has been spared, and Avram brings this ayil, brings a ram as a replacement korban. So at that point, Vayashav Avram el Na'arav, Avraham returns to his lads who had accompanied them on the trip. Vayakumu, and they all got up. Vayelchu yachdav, and they went together. El Be'er Shava, they all went to Be'er Shava. Vayeshev Avram be'Be'er Shava, and Avraham settled down. He remained for a bit in Be'er Shava. So what happened? You got this Rashi who's clearly telling us that after the Akedah, Avram goes to Be'er Shava, but where was Sarah? She was in Hebron. So this is just going to raise the question about why is Avram going to Be'er Sheva after the Akedah? Why isn't he just going back home to Sarah and Hebron? Let's see a Rashi there, though. Rashi is going to point out for us, we have to get some of the chronology here, is that when exactly did Avraham settle in Be'er Sheva? When did he settle in Hebron? What was the order of events? So we'll see there's a short Rashi here on Pasuk Yud Tes, and again, this was in last week's Parsha, and it says as follows, Vayeshav Avraham be'Be'er Sheva, is that, Vayeshav Avram be'Be'er Sheva, that after he went back to Be'er Sheva, after the Akedah, he remained there. So let's see, what does the Rashi say? Quoting an ancient source, the Seder Olam, that goes through chronological events of Tanakh. O Yeshiva Mamish, this doesn't mean that he permanently settled down in Be'er Sheva after the Akedah. Sharei b'Chevron haya Yoshev, because Avram and Sarah were already living in Hebron, Shtei Mesrei Shanim Lifnei Akedah Shel Yitzchak. They were already living in Hebron for 12 years prior to the Akedah. Yatza mi Be'er Sheva v'halach lo leChevron. He had already left. In other words, they were living in Be'er Sheva prior to Hebron. They had already left Hebron, left Be'er Sheva. They were living in Be'er Sheva prior to moving to Hebron. They had already left Be'er Sheva 12 years before the Akedah. They had already moved to Hebron. Because it says earlier, Vayagar Avram Beretz Plishtim Yamim Rabim, that Avram and Sarah lived in the land of the Plishtim for many days. In the land of Plishtim, that's where Be'er Sheva was in the land of the Plishtim. He had lived there for many days. So let's see what else Rashi says. Merubim Mishal Hebron Harishonim. So that means what? He lived in Be'er Sheva for many days, meaning more than he had originally lived in Hebron. And that was for a total of 26 years, like we explained earlier. Well, he just told us this. Let's look at where he explained this. Let's look at Rashi, and you'll see he'll give us a chronology of what exactly Avram and Sarah's journey looked like. So let's see. This is a parak earlier in Vayera, in Chaf Aleph, Lamed Beis. So Avimelech, who's the king of the Plishtim, he enters into a covenant with Avraham. The two of them make this pact together in Be'er Sheva. So then Avimelech and his general Pichol, they leave Plishtim, and they go back to the land of the Plishtim. So that's what we're told in that pasuk. Let's continue. Lamed Gimel. So pasuk Lamed Gimel states, Avraham be'Be'er Sheva. Avram establishes in Be'er Sheva an Eshel. Vayita Eshel be'Be'er Sheva. He plants or he establishes an Eshel in Be'er Sheva. Many learned that was like a hostel. It was a place where people got achila, shtia, and lina. It was a place where they got a place to rest, a place to eat, a place to drink something. Vayikra Sham b'Shem Hashem kel olam. And he used that place to call out in God's name, to educate the world that there was a creator, in monotheism. Lamed Daled, Vayagor Avram Beretz Plishtim Yamim Rabim. And Avram dwelt in the land of the Philistines, meaning in that Be'er Sheva region, for many days. So Be'er Sheva was where he was. That's the land of the Plishtim, many days. So look at this Rashi. This Rashi, again, with Seder Olam, he gives us the whole chronology of how long Avram and Sarah lived in Be'er Sheva and Hebron. Let's look at this. This is just fascinating. So he says, Yamim Rabim, what does it mean that he lived in Be'er Sheva for many days? Merubim al Shel Hebron. More than the time they had spent in Hebron prior to that. What does that mean? Bechevron asa 25 shana. In Hebron, before moving to Beersheba, Avram and Sarah had originally settled in Hebron, and they lived there for 25 years. The Khan, but in Beersheba, Esrim V'Sheish, they were there for 26 years. Now, how did he figure that all out? So let's see what he says. Shaharei, because behold, Ben Shivim V'Chamesh Shana Haya B'Tzeiso Mecharon. Avram was 75 years old when he left Hebron at the beginning of Lech Lecha to go into Israel. Also Shana, that same year, in his 75th year, Vayavova Yashav Be'elonei Mamre. That's when he settled down in Elonei Mamre, which was Hebron area. Shalom Matzinu Kodem Lachen Shnis Yashev El Hasham. That's the first place he settled down. Shebechol Mekom Osav, every other place, he was like a traveler. He was coming, he was going, but he was always a traveler. Shenemar, because it says, Vayavor Avram, that Avram passed over, Vayatek Misham, he pitched his tent there, Vayirav Baretz, and there was a famine, Vayored Avram Mitzrayim, they go down to Egypt. In other words, once they had first settled in Hebron, then they had to leave to Egypt. How long were they in Egypt for? Mitzrayim lo asa ela shalosha chadashim. They were only in Egypt for 3 months. Shoishocha Paro, because Paro threw him out. Miyad vayelech l'masav. Avram goes back into his journey. Ad vayavo vayashev vayelonei mamre asher b'Chevron, until he settled again in Elonei Mamre. So again, at age 75, he shows up in Elonei Mamre, which is Hebron, and that's where he is. There's a brief 3 months there in Egypt, but then he's back in Hebron. Sham yoshav ad shenev chastom, and he stayed in Hebron until Sodom was destroyed. Miyad, immediately after Sodom was destroyed, that's when the pasuk tells us, Vayisa misham Avraham, that Avram left Hebron and goes to Beersheba. Why did he leave Sodom? Mipnei busha shalot. He was pretty embarrassed about what happened with his nephew Lot. Everyone in the world finds out that Lot had been intimate with his 2 daughters and had born these children, Ammon and Moab, from them. Avram's kind of ashamed of that. That's a relative. So he leaves Hebron because Hebron's in the vicinity. It's very close to Sodom, very close to where Lot is. Doesn't want anyone to associate him with that. So so now he's been in Hebron for 25 years. He's now 99, so it's in his 99th year, so it's 25 years. That's when he leaves. Ben Tesha Shana, he was 99. How do I know he was 99? Because in the 3rd day after his Milah, after his circumcision, that's when the Malachim came to him before they went to destroy Sodom. So we know that Avram was 99 when Sodom was destroyed, and he left right after that. So if he was in Hebron from 75 to 99, so in his 75th year to his 99th year, so that means he was in Hebron for 25 years. Harei Esrim v'Chamesh Shana. That means Avram and Sarah lived in Hebron for 25 years. The Kanksiv, now after going to Beersheba, the pasuk tells us that they lived in Beersheba Yomim Rabim, even more time. Merubim al Rishonim, which means additional time to his first sojourn in Hebron. Hebron was 25. Now it tells us the next chunk of his career was spent in Beersheba, a little bit more time. The pasuk isn't coming to hide things, it's coming to explain. If it would have been more than just 1 year, if it was already 2-3 years more than he was in Hebron, that's how much he was in Beersheba, the pasuk would have explained that. It would have spelled it out. By the fact the pasuk didn't spell it out, it just says, yeah, he spent a little bit more time in Beersheba than he did in Hebron. So what does that indicate? It was no more than 1 year. So if he was in Hebron for 25, that means he was in Beersheba now for 26. Harei Esrim v'Sheish Shana. So he was in Beersheba the next 26 years of their career. Miyad, immediately once 26 years pass, Yatsa Misham v'Chazer l'Chevron. That's when they returned to Hebron. After spending 26 years in Beersheba, Sarah and Avram returned to Hebron. V'Oso Shana, and that year that they returned to Hebron, that was Kadma Lefnei Akedah So Shal Yitzchak Shtei Esrei Shanim. That was 12 years before the Akedah. So again, in Kach Shnei Seder Olam, that's what you'll find in Seder Olam, how it adds it up. So again, just to put this all together, Avram and Sarah, they leave Haran. Avram was 75. They go to Israel. The first place they settle down is Hebron. They're there for 25 years until Avram is 99. After the whole incident with Lot and his daughters, when Sodom was destroyed, he's so embarrassed about his nephew Lot, who's living close by in close proximity. So he leaves and he goes to Beersheba. The pasuk says he was in Beersheba a little bit longer than he was in Hebron. So if he's in Hebron for 25 years, then we say he was in Beersheba for 26 years. Then they returned to Hebron. And 12 years after returning to Hebron, that's when Akedas Yitzchak takes place. So now that brings us back up to the beginning.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi? Is that how they figured out that Yitzchak is 38 years old when he, at the Akiva?
That's part of it. A lot of the commentaries figure out that he was 37, 38 years old. You know, they did some math because they say, look.
Is it from this?
Well, I don't know if it was from this, but it's Seder Olam. This is the source here, is Seder Olam. Well, if you think about it, if he was 99 when he was told that he's going to have a child, that means he was 100 when Yitzchak's born. So if Yitzchak is born, and then they spent 26 years in Beersheba, and then 12 years later is the Akedah, that would get you to 38. That Yitzchak would have been either 37 or 38 at the time of the Akedah.
Right.
Yeah, you can use that math. Yeah, you're 100% right. You can use that math to figure that out too.
Can I ask a question? When it says that Abraham went with his young men to Beersheba, does that include Yitzchak? Did Yitzchak go with him to Beersheba?
So a plain reading of the text would be yes. A plain reading of the text would be that Na'arav would mean who are the young men who accompanied him on the journey to the Akedah? We're also there was more than just Yitzchak. He had Eliezer, he had a servant. We're also told, the Rashi says he had Yishmael with him. And then at a certain point they left the Na'arav, and it was just Yitzchak and Avram continued on their own. So a plain reading of this would be whatever Chevra accompanied him to the Akedah. That was the same Chevra that returned with him, and they went to Beersheba. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So what this comes out, though, what I'm pointing out is that they had already left Beersheba 12 years before the Akedah, which just really is going to raise a question. Just going back to the top here, how did the Parsha begin? The Parsha begins, it's now right after the Akedah. Sarah has died. And it says that Avram comes to Hebron from where? Rashi says from Beersheba. Where did Rashi get that from? Because a chapter earlier, right after the Akedah, we're told, Vayashav Avram el Narav, that Avram and Yitzchak, they go back to the lads. They all go to Beersheba, and they kind of settle down there for a temporary stay. So the question is going to be, why? Avram and Sarah are living in Hebron for 12 years already. They left Beersheba behind. They're living in Hebron for 12 years already. And now, as soon as the Akedah ends, Avram and his group, they go back to Beersheba. And they're in Beersheba. He hears that Sarah died. Now he's got to go back to Hebron. You would think,
can I ask a question? I'm sorry.
they would have returned to Hebron. Why after the Akedah did they not return to Hebron? Why'd they go to Beersheba? They left Beersheba for 12 years already. Why are they going back to Beersheba?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. I'm so confused because it seems like when he was 99, according to that Rashi, that he was in the Eretz Plishtim, right?
Uh-huh. That's where, at 99, that's when the Malachim came and visited him.
But it says in Vayera that Vayera love Belanei Mamre.
Correct. So he was living already. He was living in Beersheba. It says he went to Elonei Mamre before he did the bris milah, and all the commentaries say that he went to his buddies Aner, Eshkol, and Mamre to ask advice about doing the bris milah. In other words, does he do it publicly? Should he do it privately? How should he convince everyone? So it seems that the bris milah was done in Elonei Mamre. But he wasn't yet living back in Hebron. He didn't move back to Hebron until 12 years before the 12 years before the Akedah. So again, so here was the breakdown. He moves to Israel at 75. He lives in Hebron until he's 99. And then what happens is he leaves because he's so humiliated by what Lot did. He doesn't want to be associated. He goes to Beersheba. Now, a year later, he has his bris milah. It seems like he went back to Hebron for the bris milah, but then returned to Beersheba. The next 26 years is spent in Beersheba. There was a temporary thing. He went back to Elonei Mamre to have his bris milah. But the next 26 years, he's living in Beersheba. 12 years before the Akedah, they moved back to Hebron. So now that's going to raise the question, is that the Akedah just took place. They're living in Hebron. If they're living in Hebron, Why is Avram and his crew returning to Beersheba? That's really the question that we want to do it. There was a lot of Rashis to see, but I was just trying to set up the chronology of events and where they're living. And that really now begs the question, why, after the Akedah, did they go to Beersheba? He's not living there anymore. Sarah's in Hebron. They moved to Hebron 12 years ago. Why are they going after the Akedah? Why are they going back to Beersheba? Beersheba's a has-been. They're now back in Hebron. So let's see a Ramban. We're on page 3. The Ramban deals with this. The Ramban first quotes Rashi's whole approach, and then he's going to say something. And then you should know the Ramban has a separate way to learn things about the chronology, but we're not going to do that. We're focusing on Rashi's approach, and what the Ramban is going to tell us now is within Rashi's approach. Let's see what Ramban says. Ramban, Nachmanides says, Vayavo Avraham, Lashon Rashi. What does Rashi say? That Avram had to come back to Hebron when he found out Sarah died. Well, where was he coming from? So Ramban says, Lashon Rashi, what does Rashi say here? Mi Beersheba, Shava, that Avram was returning to Hebron from Beersheba. So he says, Ve'in zelomar shu omed sham. That doesn't mean that he was living in Beersheba at this point, because it already said, Vayashav Avram be'Beersheba, that Avram, Vayeshav Avram Beersheba, that after the Akedah, they went to Beersheba, Ki ech tia Sarah beChevron. How could it be that after the Akedah, they went back and he's returning to Beersheba because that's where their home is. If their home's in Beersheba, why was Sarah in Hebron when they died? Sarah was in Hebron when she died because that's where they were living. So the Ramban's just trying to let's make sense of this. Sarah's in Hebron. According to Rashi, they're living in Hebron for 12 years already. That's why Sarah's there. Why is Avram and the crew, why are they in Beersheba? It says, Ki ech tia, how could it be Sarah beChevron? How could Sarah be in Hebron and die in Hebron? They were living, obviously, they were living in Hebron. Aval hakavana lomar shahalach sham bayom litzarcho. That for whatever reason, after the Akedah, they took a quick trip to Beersheba. They didn't return after the Akedah of Beersheba because that's where home was. Home was in Hebron. After all, that's where Sarah died. They made a quick trip to Beersheba. Litzarcho, for his needs. V'shama, and when they're in Beersheba, they heard b'misa Sarah. The news starts to report, and it reaches them that Sarah has died. Uva misham, and Avram returns from Beersheba, lispod lav libkosa, to eulogize her and cry for her. But why? Why did he go to Beersheba? All the Ramban just said was, shahalach sham bayom litzarcho, that after the Akedah, they took a day trip, how much time it was, to go temporarily to Beersheba to take care of something. What did they go to take care of? So a couple lines later, the Ramban suggests his theory, and that's what I've got here. Va'avraham achar Akedah. After the Akedah, lo shav limkomo lechevron. He did not go back to where he and Sarah were living in Hebron. He first made a quick trip to Beersheba. Aval halach tchila al Beersheba. He first made a trip to Beersheba. Makom ha'eshel shalo. That was the place where for 26 years, Avraham had run a hostel. He had that eshel where he was supplying food, drinks, water, and a place to relax for travelers. Why did he go back there? Laseis hodah, he wanted to daven, he wanted to praise God, al niso, on this miracle that had occurred. That God had originally told him that I want you to offer your son as an olah, and then when I was about to do it, he sends an angel to tell me, no, this was all a test. What a great miracle that Yitzchak was spared. I was initially sent to slaughter him, and now he was spared. Avram wants to go thank Hashem, Al Niso, for the miracle that occurred. V'sham Shama, and while he was there in Beersheba, that's where he heard about Misa Sarah Uba. He heard that Sarah died, and that's why he returned. So what?
Rabbi,
Yes?
so that's like a really far out of the way place to go and daven to Hashem. You're
Correct.
going from Har HaMoriah
and that's
all
exactly
the way
what we're
south,
that's
far
exactly
south, and then back up.
Correct, and that's exactly what we're going to address. But let's first just speak this out for a second. What Ramban is pointing out to us is that, and this is the point that Abby's mentioning, what the Ramban is pointing out to us is as follows, is that the chronology, he's working with Rashi's chronology, that everything adds up, that Abraham and Sarah have been living in Hebron for 12 years already. Why on earth did he go back after the Akedah to Beersheba? He says it must.
Isn't that where he made the first altar after leaving
Well, no,
Samaria?
I think we're told that he again lived in Beersheba for 26 years, and that's where he had his Eshel. The pasuk says he had an Eichel, that's where he had his hostel. And in that hostel, he spent 26 years of his career preaching about the existence of God. And now what the Ramban is telling us is that immediately after, the psukim all indicate that immediately after the Akedah, of all the places to go, rather than go home, he says, I'm going back to Beersheba, because, and that's what the Ramban says. Why did he go to Beersheba? Because that's where he wanted to daven. That's where he wanted to thank God for the nace, for the miracle that he experienced. That's pretty out of the way. I would imagine there was plenty of shtibels in Hebron. If you just want to go daven, it's very out of the way to go all the way to Beersheba. That's the point that Abby's making. So this really begs the question. This Ramban has opened the door for us, but it still hasn't fully addressed it. It's really taken a trip. Why is it so important? Of all the places to daven, why do you have to go daven and thank God in Beersheba? That's a real detour. So we're going to see Rav Simcha Zissel Broida, Rav Simcha Zissel Broida, the Rosh Yeshiva from Hebron. Of all the sources to talk about this, we're talking about Hebron today, and now we're going to talk about the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. As we said last time, I think we quoted him. He would have been a contemporary of Dave Shainberg of Memphis, who was murdered in the Hebron massacre. So Rav Simcha Zissel headed the yeshiva for more than 40 years. And he had a passion. He was very, he had a liking of the Ramban, and he would give a lot of shiurim in his yeshiva explaining the Ramban. And I found in his sefer I have here at home, he actually does spend time on this Ramban, and he has a beautiful point, and I want to share it with you. So let's see what Rav Simcha Zissel does. Rav Simcha Zissel says as follows. Perish Rashi, quotes Rashi, Vayavo Avram Beersheva, that Avraham, when he was coming to eulogize Sarah, where was he coming from? From Beersheba. And then he quotes the Ramban, Ubir Ramban Tama David. Ramban wants to give a reason. Why did Avram go back to Beersheba? They were living in Hebron now. So he says, Va'avram achra akedah lo shavlim koma leChevron. They didn't go back home to Hebron. Aval holach tchila el Beersheba. He first went to Beersheba. He says, El makom ha'eshel shelo. He wanted to go to his old hostel that he had set up and where he had preached God's existence for 26 years. So that's where he wanted to go to thank God for the miracle he had experienced. The Sham Shama, and while he was there, that's where he heard about Misa Sarah, that Sarah died, and then he had to return to Hebron. So listen to what Rav Simcha Zissel does. He says as follows. I says, I have another piece in my book called Anisayon Acharon. He says, there I explain, but he does it here too. Madu Avram Avinu hitriach atzmo. He's bothered by Abby's question. Why did he take such a huge detour? Why is such a tircha? It's such a hassle. Lelechas mimakom akeda. He says, I'm going to go all the way from Hara Moriah, where the Akedah took place, and it's Hara Moriah. And instead of going to Hebron, which was much closer, at Beersheba, he says, I'm going all the way down to Beersheba. To go to the place where for 26 years, he's already left for 12 years, but for 26 years, that's where he was preaching God's existence. And there I want to go daven, and there I want to go express my appreciation to God for the miracle that occurred. Why did he do that? He could have just gone to Hebron. He could have davened in Hebron, plenty of shuls, plenty of shtibels in Hebron. He's got to go all the way to Beersheba. So he says, Mekivan shemakom ha'eshal. Why did he want to go to Beersheba? Because what was there? That was the place where for 26 years he had preached God's existence. He had educated the masses. Hayamakom hachnasas orchem shel Avram. That was the hostel. That was the inn that he had set up. Shesham hiskabtzu kol alfei v'rivavos hanashim, where tens of thousands of people had come to hear our Avram's message over the course of 26 years. Osam hechzir Avram b'tshuva. All those thousands of people, Avram had brought them under the wings of God's presence, and he had gotten them to acknowledge a creator and that there was a concept of monotheism. The kava b'libam es hamuna b'boreh. And he established in their hearts that there was such a belief, there was a concept of a creator. U'b'makom haTorah v'hachesed, and specifically in a place where he had spent so much time engaged in Torah and teaching people about God, and in Chesed, where he had done so much kindness for others, specifically there, Ratza Avram lahodos Lashem al niso. That's where Avram says, I want to thank God for the miracle that occurred. That's where I want to daven. Like the Gemara teaches us in Brachos, Rav Ami and Rav Asi, these two great sages, Even though there was at least 13 shuls in Tiberia where they lived, Lo Matzlu, they chose, they said, we're not going to daven. Where are we going to daven? Elahecha de Girsana. We're going to daven specifically in a place where we learned Torah. Davening in a shul is great, but what's icing on the cake? Davening in a place where I learned or that I taught Torah. That is more powerful, it's more impactful. He says, Diesh segula lihispalel b'makom Torah. There is a great segula. There, we could take our tefillos, we could take our prayers to the next level if we try to daven at a place where we also learn Torah. Sheshama tefillah yoser mikubeles. In such a place, for tefillah, our prayers will be more mikubal. They will be more heard, more accepted by God. And now look at this, what he's got in parentheses at the end. Ayan sham sheviu poskim. He says, look there. He says he brings down elsewhere that he brought down a poskim. Das Rabbeinu Hatzarfatim. I guess the French rabbis that at the time of the Tosfos. So that was once France. Hard to imagine. France was once the seat of Jewish scholarship, right? That's where Rashi was. So France was once a bastion of Torah scholarship. And there was an opinion by the great French rabbis, the Bali Tosos, look at this is wild. It is better to daven b'makom halimud, in a place where I normally learn Torah, b'yechidus, even though I don't have a minyan, me'asher lispalel b'tzibor shelo b'makom halimud. It's better to daven b'yechidus, all by myself, without a minyan, in the place where I normally than it is to daven in a place where there is a minyan, if that's a place where I don't normally learn Torah. That's what he says. Now he says, Ibra, by the way, lo nitzka halacha k'mosem. Halacha is not that way. We don't paskin that way. We paskin it's better to always daven with a minyan. But by the fact that there were great French rabbis who held such an opinion shows you how powerful it is to daven in a place where we learn Torah. So I think this is an amazing explanation of the Ramban. What Rav Simcha Zissel is trying to do, he's explaining the Ramban. How does the Ramban make sense? Ramban says that Abraham traveled all the way from the Akiva, Har Moriah, which was Yerushalayim, travels all the way to Beersheba to daven. Why? Because I want to daven at the place where for 26 years, that's where I taught people about Hashem. That's where I educated the masses. Why? He could have gone and davened in Hebron, plenty of shuls there. So the answer is, you're right, there are plenty of shuls in Hebron. And I'm sure the 12 years that he lived in Hebron, he taught a lot of people. But the pinnacle of Avram's success as a teacher and where he educated the most people, where he shared the most Torah, was in Beersheba. Therefore, Avram says, I feel this passion to thank God after surviving with Yitzchak, the Akedah. I want my prayers and my praise of God to be most powerful. Where should I take those prayers? I'm going to take them to the place where I had the largest part of my career, saw the most success in my career, teaching Torah, teaching the world about God. That's where I want to daven. So Rav Simcha Zissel is saying, what do we see from this Ramban? The way the Ramban is learning is that if we're always looking to make our tefillahs more powerful, so if I want to make my tefillahs, if I want my prayers to have more impact, I should make sure to pray in a place where I also learn Torah. It shouldn't be a place that's just where I go to daven. It should also be a place where I learn Torah. This is a really a beautiful concept. This is such a powerful concept of what it means to try to combine my tefillah with my Torah. That could make our prayers all that much more impactful.
Rabbi, I just looked on my map. The first place he went was outside of Bethel.
Correct. Beit El, it says that was where he first set up his first Mizbeach. Correct.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Go ahead, Abby.
Okay, thanks. It seems like another way to look at this, I mean, he's going from what would be the most holy place on earth, where the Akedah took place. I mean, you would think he'd want to daven there, and give thanks, but another way...
It's not a holy place yet. I mean, nothing's really happened there to make it holy.
All right. It's the future side of the Beis HaMikdash, but okay.
And that's the place where Yaakov makes a point of stopping there.
Exactly. But it's interesting. I saw something very, very profound today. And the first thing I did was I sent it to a few of my friends. So it could be also that if Avraham had so much success in Beersheba, that maybe he wanted to also publicize this was a tremendous miracle, a test that in other words, to kind of like emphasize the greatness of Hashem.
And all those people, that I preached to you for 26 years about Hashem. I got to tell you something that it just happened to me. Yeah, 100%.
Right.
The only thing is, I think a lot of our sources tell us that the people that were coming through there, they were not residents of Beersheba. They were travelers. Beersheba was a central location that, because of the wells that were there, everyone who traveled through the region came. So I'm not sure that those people all lived there, but just since people came through there, Avram said, this is the crossroads. This is the best place to set up an Eshel, that inn. But I'm not sure that he could gather all those people because they came and they went. They all went to their places, but I hear you.
Rabbi, are there any sources that say Abraham was not yet ready to confront Sarah with what had just happened?
I haven't seen that, but
that's a good point.
I mean, but there are a lot of sources that say that again, that there are midrashim that say that Kedah was actually the cause of her death.
Right. That's
right.
Okay.
So if anything, though, I would have imagined this could have made things better, because if he comes home with Yitzchak and she sees that her son Yitzchak is, sound and healthy, that would lessen the blow of whatever news she could have gotten off the blogs or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I would have imagined that it would have been more helpful to that's what I would say. But this is a fascinating Ramban. The Ramban's telling us that if we want to make our prayers more impactful, it's always a good idea to pray, where we learned. So if, let's say, back in this time where, people were, even now, there's a lot of people who still have to daven at home. If you're looking in your home, where should I daven? Okay, is there a spot in my home where I might sit and study to learn? That's a great spot. If that's the room that I use for Torah learning, hey, that's where I want to daven too. But just because it's a wonderful way to boost the tefillas. But that also means if we go to shul shouldn't only be a place where we daven. Shul should also be a place where we stop to learn. Because again, we want to elevate our prayers, and what we're seeing from this Ramban is the greatest way to elevate our prayers is to pray at a spot where we're also engaged in Torah and studying about God and teaching, learning about God. So if we go to shul and we're fortunate enough to go to shul, let's also take a chance. Let's take the opportunity rather to also learn in shul, because now when I come to daven there, that's also a place where I learned that we can boost the impact of our tefillas. I thought
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I just want to correct my question from before. It's not really a question. If it was after Sodom that he moved to Beersheba, then he was still in Elonei Mamre in Hebron, because Sodom happened after, right? The angels came to destroy Sodom. So he didn't move till after that.
Correct.
After the bris.
But he didn't have his bris milah. He had his bris milah before the angels came. Right.
Right. So in other words, he didn't even move it was in the 99th year, but it was after the bris.
Correct. But
it's not even a question.
Tell us though that he did that God specifically came and he had his bris milah rather in the field. It says that God appeared to him. And then the Psukim say, why did God choose to appear to him in Elonei Mamre? And there Rashi quotes, it says, because he had gone to Elonei Mamre to ask for advice about how to do the bris milah, and get some advice there. Correct. But you're right. The bris milah would have occurred before he had left. You're right. 100% there. All right. So let's see a little further here. So one more thing I want to add, we don't have too much time left, but one more thing I want to add is that we see, we were talking about prayer. In this Parsha is the source for Mincha, because towards the end of the Parsha, Eliezer goes to find Rivka to be Yitzchak's wife. So the pasuk says that when he's returning together with Rivka, it says Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lefnos erev, that Yitzchak went out lasuach. Now here the translation has pray, but we don't know necessarily what lasuach means. He went out lasuach in the field before evening. Vayisai nav vayarvi negmalim baim. He looks up and he sees a caravan of camels. Now lasuach could mean just to talk. We don't know that it means to pray. A sicha means a speech or a talk. So how do we know what lasuach means to pray? So let's see Rashi. Rashi quotes the Gemara and the Medrash. Lasuach, Rashi says lashon tefillah. This connotes that he was praying, because he says in Tehillim it says yishpoch sicho, that someone pours out their prayer. And then the Gemara says, I got the line right under there, Yitzchak tiken tfilas mincha. Yitzchak is our ancestor, our patriarch who established mincha. Shenemar, because what does the Torah say? Vayetze Yitzchak lesuach basadeh lefnos erev. That he went out for sicha, he went out to speak in the field before the night. Vein sicha ala tefillah, and sicha connotes davening. So Yitzchak is the one who really was who established mincha for us. Now, again, just relating all this is that, okay, so prayer is important, and the most important place to pray is where we learn Torah. And Yitzchak was the one who established mincha for us. I was reading a book recently that I really enjoyed. The book was called Yeshiva Days, Learning on the Lower East Side, by a Professor Jonathan Boyarin. I don't know how he pronounces the last name. Is it Boyarin or Boyarin? It was a delightful book. It wasn't long at all. It just was published a few weeks ago. And this Professor Boyarin, he's a professor in Cornell University, which is up in Ithaca, New York. But for many years, I think since the 1980s, he and his wife lived in an apartment on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. For the academic year, during the academic, he would be up at college, but whenever, the academic calendar wasn't in session, he'd be on the Lower East Side. The man was just in love with the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So it seems like one year he must have had a sabbatical. So he took that year to spend learning as much Torah as he could on the Lower East Side in Mesivta Tiferes Yerushalayim, MTJ. That was the yeshiva of Rav Moshe Feinstein. And as everyone knows, this past week, Rav Moshe's son, Rav David Feinstein, Zichrono Livracha, passed away. Rav David took over for his father after his father passed away in 1986, so about 34 years ago. That's when Rav David took over in the yeshiva. And this fellow, Jonathan Boyarin, he wrote this book about what it was like taking that year off at MTJ, and it was a nice read, and there's a lot of nice vignettes about Rav David Feinstein in there as well, because he was attending his shir for a year. So I want to share one thing with you about mincha, because we're talking about mincha and davening and in the yeshiva. This one episode has so much in it, and this was not common just to MTJ, but I think about almost all the yeshivas. Let's look at this. The Amidah prayer, or 18 benedictions, is shortened at MTJ during mincha. Rather than giving everyone the time to recite the prayer to himself, followed by a repetition out loud by the leader that includes the section of sanctification known as Kedusha, the leader recites the first phrases aloud and continues through Kedusha, following which everyone recites the entire prayer to themselves. We call this Heicha Kedusha. This is a way that when people are running, if they're in a hurry, this is what to do. Instead of the whole Shliach Tzibor, instead of Chazaras Hashatz, the Shliach Tzibor leading and repeating the entire Shemona Esrei, they call this a Heicha Kedusha. It's a quick way to get the Kedusha in, and it saves some time. All of my years in yeshiva, this was the custom as well. We never did a full Chazaras Hashatz at Mincha. It seems like this was a universal minhag amongst the yeshivas that they always did this Heicha Kedusha. So he takes him by surprise. He says, he always daven in shul. Shuls don't do this. Shul do a full Chazaras Hashatz. What's going on that in the yeshiva, they always do this shortened Chazaras Hashatz? So he says, when I reported this to the rabbi at Cornell, in other words, he had gone back up for an academic calendar, and he's speaking to a rabbi at Hillel there, he found it curious. So this must have been, I don't know who this rabbi was, but this rabbi must not have attended regular yeshivas, because as far as I know, this is the practice in all the yeshivas. So one day I asked Rabbi Karp, this was one of the rabbis he got to befriend at MTJ, the reason for this practice, meaning why in yeshiva do you do Heicha Kedusha at Mincha? Rabbi Karp told me that the previous Rosh Yeshiva, meaning Rav Moshe Feinstein, held it as a minhag, an accepted tradition carried over from Rav Chaim, founder of the great yeshiva in the small town of Volozhin. This was the custom. All the yeshivas that we have today are all outgrowths of the Volozhiner yeshiva. And Rav Moshe told him this was the minhag of Volozhin, the original, the mother of all yeshivas. This is what they did there, halfway between Minsk and Vilnius and today's Belarus. There are two, okay, it's a great minhag, but what was the justification? What was the reason behind the minhag? So he says there are two justifications for this somewhat unusual practice. First, it saves time for study. It was in the yeshiva, and the prime function of the yeshiva is to study Torah. So tefillah is important, but Torah is more important. So he says the first way they justified the minhag in Volozhin was to say because it was to give more time for Torah study. The Talmud says that scholars engaged in study only have to recite the biblical minimum of prayer. And second, what was the second reason that they said why they didn't do the full Chazaras Hashatz, the repetition? It may be assumed that in the yeshiva, everyone knows how to daven, recite the prayers for himself, and thus does not need to listen to the full repetition by the leader. In other words, what's the reason why we have Chazaras Hashatz? Is just in case there's people in the crowd who aren't literate and don't know how to read, so they'll just answer amen to every bracha while the chazan repeats it. But he said, if you're in a yeshiva where everyone's engaged all day long in Torah study, you can assume everyone knows how to daven, so it's not as necessary to have a full Chazaras Hashatz. So for these two reasons, he says that was how the minhag in Volozhin began, and that's how all the yeshivas did this. And he goes on to give another theory at all, but that's that. I wanted to share it to you. We're not going to do it inside. I found this also with Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. He also has that same explanation to the minhag. He says this was always the minhag of the yeshivas back in Europe, in the Lithuanian yeshivas, that they did a shortened Chazaras Hashatz at mincha. And he also gives that explanation that probably this was the reason behind the minhag was because everybody in the room was literate and knew how to daven, so they felt there wasn't a need for a full Chazaras Hashatz. Let's save more time, so we'll have more Torah study. So I just thought this is fascinating how this all dovetails together. Is again, just to quickly review this, we started off this morning going through the whole chronology of when Avram and Sarah lived in Hebron, and then their section in Beersheba, and then they're back in Hebron. So if they're back in Hebron, why after the Akedah is Avraham going back to Beersheba? So the Ramban gives a very novel suggestion. The Ramban's suggestion was he went back to Beersheba to take care of something. What? That's where he wanted to daven. That's where he wanted to praise God. How do we understand that? Why did he go all the way back to Beersheba? It was much quicker to just go to Hebron. So Rav Simcha Zissel explains it by saying, because what was in Beersheba? That was his yeshiva. He wanted to go back to his yeshiva, to his place where he had spent so much time studying, learning, and teaching Torah and spreading the message of God to the world. That's where he wanted to daven, because davening in such a place makes our prayers so much more impactful, which is a great thing to know. We all want our prayers to be impactful. That's something to be cognizant of. And then that dovetails beautifully, because this is the parsha that talks about mincha. We're davening mincha because of Yitzchak Avinu. Yitzchak daven mincha. And this is so let's make our mincha more impactful. Let's daven mincha. If we have the opportunity to daven at home or daven in a shul or in a beis medrash, let's daven in a place where we learn. And if we are davening at home, let's daven in a place in the home where we would engage in Torah study. And then lastly, this other point that, okay, so then if that's the case and prayer is so important, this helps us understand. So why is it that yeshivas have this universal minhag to shorten the Chazaras Hashatz, the Chazan's repetition at mincha? So that's in order to engage in more Torah, or for this other idea, because everyone there was already knowledgeable. There wasn't as much of a reason for a full a repetition of the Shemona Esrei, and therefore that'll give more time for Torah study. And then also, again, this book that mentions the Lower East Side, of David Feinstein, in the week where his family's sitting Shiva for him. I thought this was all, so much of it comes together. So I want to, we'll stop here, and we'll